All right, welcome to today's Explainer. We're jumping straight into the absolutely chaotic, almost unbelievable origin story of the biggest global concert in history. Today, we're focusing strictly on the snowball effect. We're going to look at how Live Aid 1985 started as a simple reaction to a news broadcast and how it rapidly spiraled into a transatlantic logistical miracle. Let's get right into how this incredibly massive event actually came together. Just listen to this memory from concert promoter Harvey Goldsmith. Sending Mick Jagger or David Bowie up in a rocket? I mean, it's just nuts, right? But it perfectly captures the sheer absurdity and the grandiose ambition of the logistics involved in Live Aid. But before we get to the giant rock star egos and the global broadcasts, we really have to pull back. We have to look at the somber, very real catalyst that started this whole thing.
Section 1. The broadcast that changed everything, back in October of 1984.
This era right here was the true inciting incident of our story, and the timeline was incredibly tight. On October 24th, a devastating BBC News report on the famine in Ethiopia aired. Exactly 1 month later, the Band-Aid charity single was recorded. And by July 13th, less than 9 months after that initial broadcast, Live Aid was actually happening. It's crazy. This really highlights how insanely fast this massive event snowballed into existence, entirely driven by sheer urgency.
And that urgency didn't just come out of nowhere. It stemmed from a truly harrowing reality. BBC journalist Michael Burke had traveled to Ethiopia and captured footage of an absolute catastrophe. The rains had failed for the 6th season running. At the Korum refugee camp alone, 100 people were dying every single day. This devastating dispatch shocked millions of viewers across the UK, and that included musician Bob Geldof, who basically decided that doing nothing was simply not an option.
Section 2. The Band-Aid spark, from news to notes. So Geldof, alongside Ultravox's Midge, channeled their shock directly into music. They figured the only thing they were really capable of doing was putting a record together, and that spark led to the massive charity single, Do They Know It's Christmas? The success of that single was absolutely unprecedented. It became the fastest-selling single of all time. BBC journalist Michael Burke admitted he initially thought of rock singers as, well, self-indulgent airheads, but when he returned to Ethiopia just 2 weeks after Christmas, he literally saw a fleet of Hercules transport planes on the ground. The musicians' efforts had immediately shattered expectations and translated into tangible, life-saving relief. So, what did that first wave of charity actually buy? Because it wasn't just abstract numbers in a bank account. From the proceeds of that first single alone, they funded a massive shipment. We're talking trucks, Land Cruisers, hospital tents, over 1,000 tons of dried skim milk, 140 tons of high-energy biscuits, and over 1,000 tons of grain. It proved the immediate physical impact of their work. But there was a catch.
Section 3. The Global Jukebox Idea, or a solution to a new problem.
Having bought all this aid, Bob Geldof suddenly faced a massive logistical hurdle. He needed to break a trucking cartel in Ethiopia and buy a fleet of trucks and spare parts just to distribute the supplies they had already purchased. Basically, they needed more money. A lot more money. And the spark for that solution, it actually came from a completely passing comment. Boy George, the lead singer of Culture Club, simply suggested to Bob Geldof that he should consider organizing a benefit concert. That simple suggestion really resonated, and Geldof sketched out an audacious vision. A transatlantic global jukebox that would beam live music all across the world.
Section 4. Bluffing the rock stars, the game of egos.
Securing the biggest egos in rock music to play for free on a super tight schedule was no small feat. Production manager Andy Zweck recalled that Geldof had to play a literal game of bluff to pull it off. It went like this. He would call up Elton John and say, "Hey, Bowie and Queen are already in." Then he'd hang up, call David Bowie and say, "Elton and Queen are in." By playing them off each other, the bluff actually worked, and he locked down a truly historic lineup.
And speaking of Queen, Geldof knew exactly how to hook their legendary frontman. Legend has it that Geldof's invitation to Freddie Mercury was characteristically crude, blunt, and perfectly tailored to Mercury's larger-than-life persona. Queen was actually stuck in a bit of a creative rut at the time, completely disillusioned with their routine. This wildly ambitious event was exactly the shakeup they needed.
But you know what's really fascinating? Mercury's own stated motivation for doing the show. He was incredibly frank before the event. He said he wasn't doing it out of guilt, acknowledging that poverty would exist with or without his performance. Instead, he did it out of pride. Pride that his hard work over the years meant he was actually in a position to be asked, to be up there with all the biggies, and to do something genuinely worthwhile.
Now, it's important to note that not everyone agreed to play. Some major artists declined, and for a wide variety of reasons. Michael Jackson was deep in studio work. Bruce Springsteen was just exhausted from a massive tour. Stevie Wonder actually backed out because he objected to the lack of diversity on what was a largely white bill. Def Leppard's drummer was recovering from a tragic accident, and Huey Lewis publicly questioned the logistics of how the funds would actually reach the victims. So, as you can see, it was a complex mix of professional, personal, and political reasons.
Section 5. The Logistics of a Miracle, Orchestrating the Chaos.
With the lineup mostly secured, we move to the next massive challenge. How do you actually put on simultaneous concerts on 2 different continents and broadcast them live to the world? Enter event coordinator Pete Smith, who is handed the monumental task of orchestrating this complete chaos. Because the sheer scale of what they were dealing with was monumental. You had Wembley Stadium in London with 72,000 people starting at noon. Simultaneously, JFK Stadium in Philadelphia with 85,000 people starting at 7 a.m. local time. This required incredibly careful time zone juggling. For instance, Pete Smith strategically placed Madonna at 4 p.m. in Philly. Why? Because that was primetime television in Europe and breakfast time in Australasia.
So, how do you manage this sudden influx of altruistic, yet inevitably demanding, band managers? Pete Smith used a brilliant stroke of nonsense diplomacy. A one-page, no-fee contract. He forced the music industry to operate on a strict schedule and a foundation of absolute trust. No lengthy riders, no massive performance fees. You just show up, hit your mark, and play. Naturally, that stripped-down approach led to some frantic anxiety right before the show began. Bands were absolutely terrified that the sound wouldn't be right without their usual massive sound checks. Status Quo was hesitant to open the show for this very reason, but Bob Geldof intervened with this incredibly blunt reassurance. The perfection of the audio was secondary. The importance was simply showing up for the cause.
Section 6. The Day Music Changed, July 13th, 1985. The atmosphere in Wembley was electric. The crowds weren't just watching a concert, they felt like they were participating in a global movement. The emotional weight of that day was just profound, and the artists themselves absolutely recognized it. David Bowie actually sacrificed his own stage time, giving up an entire song in his set to insist that the organizers play harrowing news footage from Ethiopia cut to the song Drive by the Cars. It was a devastating reminder of why they were all there, and it triggered a massive, immediate surge in donations.
And the sheer physical endurance of this broadcast is staggering. 16. That is the number of hours of continuous live music that was broadcast globally that day. From the first chords at Wembley to the final notes in Philadelphia, it was an unbroken chain of global pop culture aimed directly at a single crisis. But the final, truly mind-boggling impact was this number: 2 billion. An estimated 2 billion viewers across 150 nations tuned in to watch. At the time, that was roughly 40% of the entire human population on Earth, all sharing a single, simultaneous experience.
Bob Geldof later summarized the ultimate achievement of Live Aid with this really powerful thought. Despite all the cynicism in the world, that day, the global audience united in an unprecedented act of compassion. Pop music, which is so often dismissed as trivial, had suddenly assumed an incredible social responsibility and manifested a profound, shared humanity.
As we wrap up this explainer today, I want to leave you all with a bit of a provocative thought. Did Live Aid actually create lasting structural change to global inequality, or did it primarily just rewrite the playbook for how the music industry handles charity? It raised millions, and it saved lives? Absolutely, there's no doubt about that. But as you reflect on this historic day, ask yourself, did it change the system or just the soundtrack? Thanks for exploring this with me today, and keep asking the big questions.